In the early 1980s, Sicily woke each morning to a new count of the dead. Not soldiers, not rebels, but judges, politicians, police officers, and mafia bosses themselves. Cars exploded on highways. Bodies were dumped in alleyways. Entire families vanished overnight. And the most shocking truth of all was this: the mafia wasn't losing a war against the state. It was fighting itself. This is the story of how Cosa Nostra, the world's most feared criminal organization, nearly annihilated itself in a civil war so violent it forced the modern Italian state to fight back. For most of the 20th century, the Sicilian Mafia survived by mastering restraint. Violence was used sparingly. Killings were private. Disappearances were preferred to spectacles. The goal was control, not chaos. Cosa Nostra functioned like a shadow government. It mediated disputes, enforced contracts, and infiltrated politics and business. And at the top sat the Commission, a council of mafia bosses designed to prevent internal war. It wasn't democracy, it was balance. But balance depends on everyone agreeing to the rules. And by the 1970s, those rules were under pressure. Heroin changed the mafia forever. What had once been a regional criminal network suddenly became a global enterprise. Through partnerships with American mafia families, Sicilian clans controlled the refining and shipment of heroin into the United States. The profits were unprecedented. Billions of dollars flowed into Palermo, Corleone, and rural villages that had never known wealth. Farmhouses became fortresses. Shepherds became millionaires. But heroin didn't just bring money, it brought ambition. By the late 1970s, Cosa Nostra was no longer unified in spirit. In Palermo, the old families ruled. Men like Stefano Bontade and Salvatore Inzerillo. They were polished, politically connected, and cautious. They believed visibility was death. Then there were the Corleonesi. They came from the interior of Sicily, from poverty and isolation. They had clawed their way up through violence, not diplomacy. And they followed a leader who saw the mafia not as a system to preserve, but as a throne to seize. Salvatore Toto Riina didn't look like a kingpin. He was short, soft-spoken, and often mistaken for a laborer. But beneath the plain exterior was one of the most ruthless figures in criminal history. Riina believed fear was the only real authority. He had no loyalty to tradition, no respect for hierarchy, and no patience for compromise. To him, the Commission wasn't a safeguard. It was an obstacle. The war didn't begin with an announcement. It began with absences. A boss stopped answering calls. A trusted lieutenant disappeared. A body was found. Then another. At first, many believed it was business as usual. They were wrong. In 1981, restraint collapsed. Mafia bosses were murdered in daylight. Streets once controlled by handshake agreements became execution grounds. Stefano Bontade was gunned down on his birthday. Salvatore Inzerillo was hunted down, along with relatives who had done nothing but share his blood. This was not negotiation. It was extermination. Riina introduced a terrifying new doctrine: total annihilation. If a man was killed, his family followed. Sons, brothers, cousins, anyone who might grow up seeking revenge. Children were sometimes spared, but only if they were forced into exile, never to return to Sicily. The message was absolute. There would be no next generation. By the mid-1980s, over 1,000 people had been murdered. Sicily fell silent, not from peace, but from fear. Funerals became routine. Witnesses vanished. Police found themselves isolated and intimidated. Toto, Rina, and the Corleonesi had won. The commission was theirs. Palermo was theirs. The heroin routes were theirs. Cosa Nostra was unified under one iron fist. But in winning the war, the Mafia made a fatal mistake. They became too visible. The scale of violence shocked Italy. Judges who had once been isolated now found public support. Journalists refused to look away. And for the first time, the Italian state committed fully to confronting the Mafia as a national threat. At the center of this response was a small group of magistrates in Palermo, men who knew they were marked for death. Among them was Giovanni Falcone. Falcone did something revolutionary. Instead of treating Mafia crimes as isolated murders, he treated Cosa Nostra as a single criminal organization, structured, hierarchical, and prosecutable as a whole. He followed the money. He used insider testimony. And for the first time, the Mafia began to crack from the inside. The key weapon wasn't guns. It was pentiti. Mafia bosses turned informants, men who, horrified by the bloodshed or fearing Rina's paranoia, chose to cooperate with the state. They told stories of secret meetings, initiation rituals, chains of command. The myth of the Mafia as untouchable began to crumble. In 1986, Italy launched the Maxi trial. It was unprecedented. Hundreds of defendants, years of testimony, entire Mafia families on trial at once. And the verdict was devastating. 338 convictions, life sentences to high-ranking members, long prison terms for the very men who thought themselves untouchable. Cosa Nostra had never suffered a blow like this. Rina responded the only way he knew how, with terror. Throughout and after the trial, judges were assassinated, police officers killed. In 1992, Giovanni Falcone himself was murdered in a massive highway bombing, along with his wife and bodyguards. But this time, fear didn't bring silence. It brought outrage. The Italian public erupted. The state doubled down. And the Mafia, already weakened by internal betrayal and mass arrests, began to fracture. Rina was arrested in 1993, ending the reign of the man who had turned Cosa Nostra into a slaughterhouse. The Second Mafia War was over, and the cost was immense. The Corleonesi had won power, but lost the very thing that had kept the Mafia alive for generations: invisibility. By embracing terror, they invited the full force of the modern state. Cosa Nostra survived, but it was never the same. Quieter, smaller, more cautious. The war that made it powerful also nearly destroyed it. And in that contradiction lies its greatest lesson, because sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one outside your organization. It's the one who's willing to burn everything down to rule the ashes.